They called it Henderson's Harvest. 89 graves, perfectly aligned, buried beneath 4 miles of desert silence. In 1908, a Union Pacific surveyor stumbled upon what should not exist, an unmarked cemetery hidden behind a cluster of Joshua trees, its mounds arranged in a grid so precise it looked designed like a code. The records show the bodies went into the earth between 1905 and 1908, but the permits never existed. No family burials, no church records, no names. For 70 years, the railroad quietly rerouted its tracks to avoid the site. Locals whispered of curses, of strange lights moving across the sand on moonless nights, and of voices carried by the wind, calling names no one dared repeat. But all of it traced back to one man, Jeremiah Henderson. They say Las Vegas was built on ambition. That's a lie. It was built on blood. What I'm about to tell you was buried for over a century, hidden behind sealed archives, dead witnesses, and carefully erased maps. If you stay, you'll know why those 89 graves were necessary, and why men like Henderson were given permission to do the unthinkable. This isn't just history. It's a warning. August 1905. Las Vegas wasn't yet the glittering city of sin. It was dust, desperation, and deals made under oil lamps. The Henderson family arrived with nothing but a wagon, 3 children, and $63. Jeremiah Henderson was supposed to build a future here. He built something else entirely. It began with a man named Thomas Edwards, a traveler, a fugitive, a man who came to Henderson's small way station begging to disappear. He offered $500, more than Jeremiah had seen in 2 years, if someone could erase him from the world. That night, while Edwards slept, Jeremiah crept into the small cabin where he lay. No hesitation, no prayer, just a pillow pressed down until silence. He buried Edward as behind the homestead in a grave exactly 6 feet deep, marking it with a single stone carved with the number 1. That number mattered, because Jeremiah wasn't improvising. He was testing a system. Within weeks, whispers spread through Las Vegas saloons. There was a place south of the tracks where men could vanish, permanently. Jeremiah had found his trade, and somewhere between survival and sin, he stopped seeing bodies as people. They became currency. By winter of 1905, the Henderson homestead had become more than a way station. It was a funnel. Men arrived with secrets too heavy to carry. Deserters, thieves, drifters, embezzlers, killers, all seeking one thing: erasure. Jeremiah chose his targets carefully at first. He called it the disappearing service. Only men with money and no connections, no families, no ties. The perfect prey. Each killing was methodical, same depth, same spacing, same orientation. When investigators unearthed the records decades later, they discovered something chilling. The 89 graves weren't random. They formed a perfect geometric grid aligned with magnetic north. Why? No one knows, but Jeremiah's journal, hidden beneath a loose floorboard, offered one cryptic line. The pattern is the point. The land demands symmetry. Sarah Henderson, his wife, found that journal in late December. Inside were sketches of the burial plots, calculations of angles and distances, and a growing obsession that seemed less about money and more about placement. She confronted him. He didn't deny it. He didn't apologize. "We're not just burying bodies," he whispered. "We're anchoring something." What was Henderson anchoring, and who taught him this design? January 1906. The desert nights were colder than bone, but Jeremiah Henderson had stopped feeling anything. The killings were no longer about survival, they were about building. His journal began filling with strange diagrams, coordinates, and symbols Sarah couldn't understand. Circles within squares, triangles splitting lines of latitude, every burial site plotted with mathematical precision, each 6 feet apart. No more, no less. Sarah begged him to stop. She thought the murders were about money, about buying up parcels near the railroad depot before the Los Angeles businessman got there first. But Jeremiah whispered something that froze her blood. This land isn't ours. It was given to us, but it has a price. Who gave it? He never said. Some nights, Sarah claimed she saw lanterns deep in the desert, men in black coats standing silently among the graves as if watching. Once she woke to find Jeremiah gone, only to see him kneeling in the sand at dawn, palms pressed flat against the earth like he was listening. It wasn't just murder anymore. It felt like ritual. By the spring of 1906, Jeremiah had buried 14 men, and every time another body went into the ground, Sarah swore the desert grew quieter. But it wouldn't stay quiet for long. Spring 1906. Las Vegas was growing. More saloons, more money, more blood. And with growth came attention. The first cracks appeared when a Union Pacific detective named Marshal William Thompson arrived to investigate missing travelers. Men had been vanishing between the Los Angeles line and the Salt Lake connection, and the pattern always pointed back toward the Henderson homestead. But before Thompson could get close, Jeremiah received a visitor, a man no one in town had ever seen before. Witnesses described him as tall, pale, dressed in a black wool coat despite the heat. He arrived by private carriage at dusk, spoke with Jeremiah for nearly an hour, then left without touching a drink or revealing his name. After that meeting, Jeremiah's methods changed. He stopped selecting victims based on money or usefulness. Now it was about placement. He sought specific ages, specific heights, even the orientation of their final resting positions. The grid was expanding deliberately, almost like a map. Sarah overheard one fragment of that meeting. One line etched itself into her memory. 89 bodies, no more, no less. The lines must be closed before the year turns. From that night on, Jeremiah stopped speaking like a man chasing wealth. He spoke like a man serving instructions. By summer of 1906, Jeremiah Henderson was no longer a man chasing opportunity. He had become an instrument. Sarah noticed it first. He stopped writing in his journal. Instead, folded notes began arriving at night, slid beneath their door by unseen hands. The instructions were precise: who to take, where to dig, and how far apart the graves must remain. And the victims changed. They weren't all fugitives anymore. Now, Jeremiah was luring ordinary men, salesmen, prospectors, railroad workers, anyone whose body fit a specific measurement. One was required to be exactly 6 feet 1 inch tall. Another had to be missing a left molar. Sarah didn't understand at first, but Jeremiah did. These weren't random bodies. They were components. Some nights, she heard murmurs outside, multiple voices. Lanterns glowed faintly through the Joshua trees, where strangers in dark coats stood in silence, watching as Jeremiah dug. The locals started whispering. They called it Henderson's harvest, claiming the family had struck a deal with something old. Samuel, Jeremiah's 12-year-old son, followed his father one night. He hid behind a wagon and watched as Jeremiah knelt before 3 black-coated men, his hands buried in the sand. Samuel swore he heard one of them say, "When the 89th falls, the door opens." Samuel didn't sleep for days. Autumn 1906. Samuel Henderson couldn't keep silent anymore. One moonless night, while his father slept, he crept outside with a lantern and shovel. He wanted proof that the nightmares whispered through the walls weren't real. But when he dug beneath grave 14, what he found made him drop the lantern and vomit into the sand. The body wasn't lying flat. It was angled, almost upright, like a spoke in a wheel. He checked another grave, then another. Each body carefully positioned, all facing inward toward an empty center point where nothing had been buried yet. It wasn't a cemetery. It was a design. Samuel traced his father's crude sketches and compared them to the grave sites. The grid formed a perfect sigil, a shape older than Las Vegas, older than the state itself. He didn't recognize it then, but historians now whisper it's eerily similar to symbols found on ancestral Pueblo and petroglyphs carved hundreds of miles away. Sarah confronted Jeremiah after Samuel told her. She screamed at him, demanded answers. Jeremiah's response was cold, detached. We are only finishing what was started before us. That night, Samuel swore he heard humming coming from beneath the earth. And then, the lights began. Winter, 1906. The valley around Las Vegas began whispering secrets no one wanted to hear. It started with railroad workers. They spoke of lights, pale, floating orbs gliding silently over the desert at night, always circling above the Henderson property. At first, the sightings were dismissed as mirages. But then came the stories of missing travelers who were last seen following those lights, like moths drawn to flame. Sarah kept a journal hidden beneath the mattress, documenting every sound, every shadow. She wrote of nights when the air itself vibrated, like a distant, low-frequency hum rolling beneath the earth. Some evenings the family woke to find their oil lamps extinguished, no matter how tightly sealed. Other nights, the youngest daughter, Rebecca, would stand at the window whispering names she couldn't possibly know. By January 1907, 19 graves were filled. One evening, Jeremiah brought home a man dressed in an Eastern-style three-piece suit. His name was never spoken aloud. Samuel overheard fragments. Alignment, ley convergence, ancient contracts. The man traced his fingers across Jeremiah's journal like someone inspecting blueprints, then handed him a leather pouch heavy with gold coins. Sarah demanded to know who he was. Jeremiah's answer was quiet, almost reverent. They've been waiting for this land longer than we've been alive. Spring, 1907. Railroad detective Marshal William Thompson had spent months charting patterns of disappearance across the Las Vegas Valley. Every line, every vanished man, every whispered rumor, they all converged on one place, the Henderson homestead. He arrived at dusk, armed with a badge, a revolver, and the quiet confidence of a man who thought law still meant something out here. It didn't. Samuel watched from the shadows as Thompson questioned Jeremiah on the porch. Jeremiah's voice was calm, measured, but his right hand trembled, not from fear, but from anticipation. Thompson insisted on searching the property. Jeremiah agreed, too easily. Within the hour, Thompson found the burial field. 81 small stone markers stretching into the desert, numbers carved so perfectly they looked machine-cut. He knelt to inspect the nearest grave, brushing away sand, and that's when he noticed it. The graves weren't just aligned. They were oriented, forming a massive circular sigil with an empty void at its center. He returned to the house, furious, demanding answers. But when Thompson reached for his revolver, 3 men in black coats emerged from the Joshua trees, silent as predators. The next morning, Thompson's horse wandered into town without him. His badge lay nailed to the Henderson's doorframe, split clean down the middle. From that day on, no one in Las Vegas spoke his name. Summer 1907. Sarah Henderson had reached her breaking point. She waited until Jeremiah left for one of his meetings and slipped into the desert with Samuel and a lantern. Her heart pounded as they walked straight toward the center of the grid, the one unfilled circle where no grave had been dug. The sand there was different, harder, packed unnaturally tight, as though something below resisted disturbance. Samuel began to dig anyway, his small hands clawing at the dirt until the lantern light revealed stone, a flat black surface covered in strange spiraling etchings. It wasn't a rock. It was a lid. The carvings weren't English nor Spanish, nor anything Sarah had ever seen. Some symbols resembled constellations, others mirrored ancestral Puebloan petroglyphs carved into caves hundreds of miles away, but these were older, deliberate, waiting. As Samuel brushed away the dust, a low hum began, faint but steady, rising from beneath the stone. The air turned cold. Sarah grabbed his wrist and yanked him back. That night she confronted Jeremiah. He didn't deny it. "It was never about us," he whispered. "This land was marked long before Las Vegas, long before Nevada." Sarah realized then, the 89 bodies weren't graves. They were keys. August 1907. The pale man returned. Sarah woke to the sound of carriage wheels crunching over sand. When she peered through the lace curtains, she saw him, the man in the Eastern three-piece suit, standing perfectly still under the moonlight, flanked by two silent men in black coats. Jeremiah greeted him outside. No words at first, just a slow exchange of leather pouches and folded parchment. But then Sarah heard it, a single phrase whispered low, carried unnaturally clear on the wind. "When the 89th falls, the lid will open." Her stomach dropped. She crept closer, pressing her ear against the warped wood of the front door. The pale man spoke again, his voice soft, but weighted with something inhuman. "Your bloodline binds the gate. You were chosen, Jeremiah. You always were." Jeremiah's reply was broken, almost pleading. "And if we refuse?" Silence. Then the pale man stepped forward, his face now visible in the moonlight. Skin stretched thin and colorless, eyes like dull glass. "Refusal isn't written here." The next morning, Sarah noticed something new. Fresh markings carved into their barn door. 3 concentric circles interlaced by jagged lines. Samuel swore he saw them glowing faintly after sundown. By autumn, 88 graves were filled. 1 remained. October 1907. Samuel found the journal by accident. Jeremiah kept it hidden beneath the loose floorboard under his bed. A worn leather book filled with sketches, measurements, and strange symbols he didn't understand. But near the back, written in a hand that wasn't his father's, Samuel found a passage that froze his blood. "Upon the falling of the 89th, the seal will drink from the blood of its lineage. The gate cannot open without its rightful heir." He read it 3 times before it made sense. The final body had to be his. Samuel ran to Sarah, trembling, clutching the journal. When she saw the passage, she didn't scream. She didn't even cry. She just closed the book, stared into the distance, and whispered, "They've known since before you were born." That night, Sarah packed what little she could carry and tried to flee with Samuel and Rebecca under cover of darkness. But as they reached the edge of the property, the lights returned. Those silent, hovering orbs they had seen weeks before. The air vibrated, the earth trembled beneath their feet, and from the darkness came the sound of many footsteps, men in black coats surrounding them without a word. Jeremiah appeared behind them, pale, shaking, holding a lantern. His voice cracked as he spoke. "I tried to keep you safe, but it was decided long before me, November 1907. The ritual was set." The pale man arrived at dusk with his procession of silent, black-coated figures. They formed a perfect circle around the Henderson homestead, their boots sinking into the cold sand. In the center of the grid, the stone lid waited, veined with pale light now pulsing faintly beneath its carvings. Jeremiah stood there, lantern in hand, broken and hollow-eyed. Samuel clung to Sarah's dress, Rebecca hiding behind them both. The pale man extended a hand, long, thin, almost skeletal, and spoke without opening his mouth. The words came inside their skulls. The blood, the key. Jeremiah stepped forward, shaking, holding Samuel by the shoulders. But Sarah moved faster. With a scream that tore from her chest, she pulled a kitchen blade from her apron and pressed it against her own palm. "Take me," she spat. "Not him." For the first time, the pale man's head tilted, curious, almost amused. Then slowly he nodded. Sarah's blood touched the stone, and the earth screamed. A deep, grinding sound erupted beneath them, like bedrock being torn apart. The graves began to vibrate, sand collapsing inward as faint human-shaped impressions clawed up from below. And then, everything stopped. The pale man turned sharply to Jeremiah, furious now. She has broken the sequence. That night, the Henderson house shook until dawn, but when the sun rose, every one of the 88 graves was empty. December 1907. The graves were open, all 88. Sarah woke to the sound of whispers seeping through the cracked window panes. At first, she thought it was the wind, but when she leaned closer, she realized the voices were speaking names. Her name, Jeremiah's, Samuel's. She rushed outside, lantern shaking in her hand. The cemetery was a wasteland now, mounds of earth overturned, splintered coffin wood scattered like kindling. The air reeks of rot and something older, stone dust and iron. And then she saw them. Shapes moved slowly among the dunes, their bodies twisted, their faces pale and stretched too thin, as if death had stripped them of everything but intent. Their hollow eyes fixed on the Henderson house. Samuel woke to scratching beneath the floorboards. He pressed his ear to the wood and heard fingernails dragging, slow, deliberate, impossibly deep. The pale man returned just before dawn, but this time he was not calm. "You opened the wrong gate," he hissed, his voice sharp and layered, like many speaking at once. "They were never meant to rise. Now it won't stop." Jeremiah begged him to explain, but the pale man only whispered, "There are others beneath the stone, older than language, older than us." That night, Sarah found Samuel standing barefoot outside, staring at the stone lid. His voice was hollow when he spoke. "They're calling my name, Mama." January 1908. The desert had gone silent. No birds, no wind, not even the distant hum of cicadas. Sarah said it felt like the entire land was holding its breath. Inside the house, Samuel hadn't slept in 3 nights. His eyes were ringed in grey, his lips pale, his voice low and distant. He spent hours tracing the symbols from Jeremiah's journal across the wooden walls, each mark etched perfectly, as if he'd drawn them 1,000 times before. Rebecca whispered that sometimes, when Samuel wasn't speaking, his mouth still moved. Jeremiah tried to destroy the journal, but when he tossed it into the fire, the flames died instantly. The pale man returned that evening, his glassy eyes reflecting the last rays of sun. "You've accelerated it," he said flatly. "The blood woke something that isn't bound by your language, your faith, or your laws." Sarah demanded to know what it wanted. The pale man finally looked at Samuel, not at them. "It wants to wear him." That night, they heard it beneath the stone. A heartbeat, slow, deliberate, impossibly deep. Each thud rattled the windows and set the walls groaning. Then, Samuel began speaking in a language none of them had ever heard. It wasn't human. The sounds were harsh, layered, like many voices pouring through one throat. Sarah tried to hold him. His skin was ice cold. February 1908. The desert split open. It began just before dawn. A low, thunderous rumble that rolled beneath the Henderson house and stretched for miles. The stone lid at the center of the grid fractured down the middle, glowing veins spreading like lightning through the sand. Jeremiah tried to drag Samuel away, but the boy's body wouldn't move, his feet rooted into the ground as though something beneath was holding him. His lips trembled, his breath white in the cold air, and then he whispered, in a voice not his own, "The seal is broken. I am the vessel." The earth beneath the graves collapsed inward. From the abyss came a sound, not human, not animal, a resonance that shook the sky itself. The 88 risen figures knelt as one, their hollow faces turned toward Samuel. Sarah screamed, pulling at him, but the pale man stopped her with an outstretched hand. His expression was no longer cold. It was fear. "You don't understand," he rasped. "This is older than death, older than the idea of God." The cracks widened. Sand poured into the chasm as the air filled with the stench of stone and something long buried. And then it breathed. A vast, shuddering exhalation rolled out from beneath the desert floor, carrying whispers in hundreds of overlapping voices. Every lantern, every candle snuffed out at once. In the darkness, Samuel turned his head slowly, his eyes now two black mirrors reflecting nothing. "It remembers," he said, "and it's hungry." No one saw the Hendersons after that night. The property was abandoned. Locals fenced it off, and the old road into Las Vegas was rerouted. But even now, more than a century later, strange things happen there. Campers report lights without sources, whispers carried on dead air, and the distant sound of a heartbeat beneath the sand. Some say the 88 still wander the dunes, waiting. Others believe the thing beneath the stone never stopped breathing. And if you ever find yourself near the old Henderson land at night, don't listen too closely, because they say it calls you by name.